Hello. To start this story, I want to say I have never seen anything like this in my life. At the time, I was 15 years old, sitting with a friend's dogs while they were out of town in Benson, Arizona. This property had a lot of acres, and it took about 15 minutes to get to their small house, right in the middle of probably about 75 acres. It was around 10 p.m. My friend had 8 dogs, and they usually stayed outside for the most part, because they were big watchdogs who seemed to have been able to defend themselves in the past. Before everything happened, I was inside their tiny home making food when I heard her biggest dog start squealing quietly. Very scared and in pain, but loud enough for me to hear. I knew the sounds were unusual for this dog. I shot up and ran outside to see what was going on. I thought maybe the dog might have hurt himself or something similar, but this was not the case. I ended up seeing a 5-6 foot tall, pale, very skinny creature hunched over this dog, sucking on his head. I was very stunned, almost too stunned to speak, but I managed to shake off that feeling. I started yelling at this thing because the dog started yelping loudly, and I was telling the creature to get out of there and trying to scare it. I ran over to her dog as fast as I could because I'd heard of these things before, perhaps a chupacabra. And I knew they would likely eat the dog if I didn't do something. But I stopped about 10 feet in front of it to see this creature jump up and run as fast as it could away. I couldn't help but keep looking over my shoulder for the rest of the time I was there. I also didn't let those dogs out at night, and I didn't care to go out there either. When my friends came back, I told everyone what happened and what I saw. It felt like everyone was just as frightened as I was, which made me even more unsettled. I ended up leaving that desert and did not look back. Still don't know what to make of it to this day, except I know it was something demonic. I was homeless for a few years from 18 to 21, and I used to stay in a tent with my ex. I always had to end up moving my tent spot, eventually because the cops would find us. Either way, I had spent a lot of time in the woods at night. One night when walking back to my tent, I heard something down the trail a bit. I shined my light in the direction of the sound to be met with glowing eyes reflecting my flashlight. However, where the eyes were made it so whatever I was looking at was taller than me, and I'm 5 feet 8 inches. There is no animal that tall in my area. I turned to my ex and told him to start going to the tent faster. He could tell something was off, so he asked if I was alright. I told him I'll tell him when we get to the tent, because I have always been told not to acknowledge such creatures/spirits as it gives them more power. Then some nights, there would be smacking on our tent. It would hit all the sides of the tent. We would look out the tent windows and check outside the tent, but we would never find anything or hear any footsteps. Another night, during the summer, we decided to go for a small hike at night because it was way more of a tolerable temperature. About 15 minutes into the hike, I started feeling paranoid, like I was being watched. About 5 minutes later, I heard a maniacal laugh coming from somewhere in the woods. I couldn't pinpoint which direction though. My ex asked what was that, and I loudly said, "I don't know, but whatever it is it needs to stop." As soon as I said this, multiple maniacal laughs now started. My ex and I turned around and walked back for what felt like the longest 20 minutes. Another time I found a severed coyote head with something hung in the tree beside it. That had a tooth in it. And lastly, one time I was with my friend parked on the road far into the woods, so we could smoke. The passenger window was down, which is where I was sitting. The woods were right next to me. Again the feeling of being watched overwhelmed me. 2 minutes or so later I heard a hello, and then, John. coming from the woods. I told my friend to turn around and we needed to leave. I didn't tell her why because like I said, I don't like to acknowledge these things until I'm far away from them. That's all that immediately comes to mind at the moment. Thanks for reading. I was talking with my stepmom about late-night driving experiences, and she told me about an encounter she had in Leroy, Montana, on a road trip from Washington to North Dakota. She was on Route 87 and was running low on gas. The Fort Benton exit had a lot of construction going on, and she couldn't see any way to get to the gas stations from the exit ramp, so she got back on the highway. After a while, she saw an exit sign for Leroy, Montana, and it said there was gas and food available. She took the exit and saw another sign reading, Leroy 5 miles. At this point, they had no service and were relying solely on an atlas. The road took them through a dark wooded forest, and after a while, my stepmom realized the odometer had gone up 15 miles, and they still hadn't found any sign of a town, but she kept driving and waited for her friend, who was holding the atlas, to say something. After a few more minutes, her friend spoke up and said she thinks they passed Leroy somehow, and my stepmom agreed. They found a wide shoulder to turn around, and as they were pulling off to make their turnaround, they both had an image flash into their heads. A man standing in the middle of the road. Neither of them actually saw him in real life, but both could describe the man in exact detail. He was tall, with a brown flannel, and what looked to be a scythe, broken in half, with the handle wrapped in a white bloody cloth. He also had a thick scar across his forearm. While that by itself is weird enough, my stepmom planned never to go anywhere near that place again. For the next 8 months, she received frequent phone calls from Leroy, Montana. After my own research, I've come to find out that Leroy is a ghost town unmarked on Google Maps unless you specifically search it up. Some friends and I have already planned to go to Leroy over spring break this year, and see if we can find anything. I'm posting this here to see if anybody else might have seen or heard of anything similar in the area, or have any insight as to what might have happened.